What if you don't prep? Do no prep. Run your game blind. Will D&D without any prep at all be such a revelation you stop ever preparing a session again? And games like Blades in the Dark are supposed to be no prep, so can you just read the rules and run them? Some of the internet says that's true. I think that's a terrible idea. Welcome to How to Prep for No Prep Games. I spend a lot of time on this channel encouraging you to prep less, and in this video I'm going to turn that on its head by redefining what prep is, so that by the end of the video you'll know what is worth doing and why it is not always what you think it is. A lot of weight is given to the idea that Blades in the Dark, for example, is a champion of the no prep side of our hobby. People coming to it from years-long D&D games make excited posts on Reddit about how they didn't need to spend time writing adventures and fleshing out NPCs beforehand. Equally, there's as many posts saying their group didn't get it and their group likes the meticulous planning side of heists and scores and capers. But does the design of games like Blades in the Dark mean you can't do prep? No, it doesn't. And yes, you should. Let's start by taking the abbreviation off. Should you prepare for a game? Well, yes, you really should. Is preparing just writing adventures and deciding on monsters? No, it isn't. In fact, have you already been preparing all along? Yes. And the reason you can run a session in the middle of your regular D&D campaign without an afternoon frantically writing that one session is because you've been preparing for it after all. I can pick up Toon, flick through the rules to remind myself of the die rolling, and be ready to run it 30 minutes later. But I have been preparing. I've watched a lot of cartoons over the years, and this means the genre of Toon is firmly embedded in my mind. I can visualize the difference between a Toon mouse with a slingshot and one from Root RPG. I know my players will be drawing from similar visual libraries when I say there's a stoat with a top hat and a machine gun. I was prepped to run Toon long before I had ever owned a copy. The more familiar we are with the genre, the easier it is to improvise details, scenes, people, or places. This is where we prep for our no-prep games, by immersing ourselves in the worlds. And much like a really badly designed bath, the narrower the genre, the deeper we have to immerse ourselves to avoid splashing details out of this metaphor, which I'm extending in the wrong direction, I think. Taking the example of Blades in the Dark, I don't want to accidentally mention a revolver and then have to include repeating firearms, or say something is petrol-driven when I ought to say it's coal-powered. I want to be evocative. I need a palette to paint from. You know your D&D world already by the middle of the campaign. It's easier to improvise within it. Luckily, the background in Blades in the Dark is already written with an improvisational mindset built in. The NPC descriptions are pointedly terse, with adjectives to give a steer on voices and mannerisms, but no long waffle about physical appearances you might feel obliged to remember. And there's slightly too many factions to keep them all in your head, which is great because it forces you to pick from the ones that you actually remember, which are naturally the ones you're most interested in. So how have I prepped specifically for Blades? Well, the author recommends watching Peaky Blinders and reading The Lives of Locke Lamora, so that was easy. I've imported the SRD into an Obsidian vault and gone through correcting the syntax, which has made me reread the rules. I made a summary sheet about the playbooks and crew books for my players, which made me reread all of those. For the player-facing side on my GM screen, I've made inserts about other rules, which you get the idea. Incidentally, put rules facing the players on the screens, not pictures. Isn't that obvious? Rules aren't just for GMs. As an aside, there's a lot of random roll products out there for many games where you can get a score, an adventure, or rumors, all generated from tables. For this low price, never be stuck for an idea again, they say. I can see the attraction, but I feel they're often too detailed. Here's the plot and the side plot, what the players don't know, and a complication of 3 NPCs, and. I know why. If you want to charge people, you feel obliged to have a gilded product. Each element is glued on by another random roll, and this feels wrong. Anyone who's read Play Unsafe knows that a GM's best weapon is that if we get stuck, we should not think. We should blurt out the most suddenly self-evident thing. And being able to do that comes from the connections and linkages we've already installed in our heads, suddenly sparking in a panic not from stringing unrelated things together calmly on paper beforehand. Do get stuck for ideas, then use the panic as a spur to say the obvious. Well, of course he's a vampire. So there you have it. Prepare for dinosaur games by watching Jurassic Park. Prepare for space games by reading sci-fi. Get yourself ready for Blades in the Dark by making steampunk Zoom screen shares. Immerse yourself in the world so the details aren't memorized, but they're ready to be improvised out of a fertile soil you've soaked with the bath water from that immersive bath that and yes, obviously, read the rulebook through 1.5 times, but don't worry about memorizing everything, and especially not anything esoteric like lists of gods or faraway nations or the alchemy creation system. Of course, you can flesh out NPCs, and I do think you should once they're in use, but I have some opinions about exactly that and when you might want to do that to avoid a lot of work going to waste. My video on that is here.